Hey, Mr. P here. In this video, we are going to talk about securing and documenting the crime scene. So in the last video, if you remember, we talked specifically about types of evidence. So we differentiated between direct and circumstantial evidence. We talked about the limitations of class evidence. We talked about the specifications of individual evidence. And then we kind of discussed briefly biological and non-biological evidence as well. So we are moving out of types of evidence, and now we're going to talk about how to apply the types of evidence within the crime scene, but also how to properly secure a crime scene and how to collect evidence properly and how to document the crime scene as well. Okay, so when a crime has been committed, an investigation team is going to be called upon in order to investigate the crime at the crime scene. The investigation team includes a variety of people like police officers, crime scene investigators, those would be your CSI, like crime scene technicians, medical examiners if there is if there is death or injury. You have detectives and specialists. And so what do all of these people do? There is a chain of command. Obviously, when a crime has been committed, police officers are going to be the first to arrive. Because that's their job, right? Their job is specifically secure the scene if there is immediate danger, to take care of the danger, to decrease the threat, decrease danger, make sure the scene is safe. Okay, so police officers respond first. They make sure the scene is safe. No other person within the investigation team is going to arrive on scene until the scene is safe. Once the police officers have determined that the scene is safe and they have completely secured the scene, including putting the crime scene tape around a suspected crime scene, right? That is one of the things that you've probably seen on TV, seen in movies. Crime scene tape is put out at the scene of a crime by the police officers prior to, in a lot of cases, the crime scene investigators or detectives or medical examiners would even show up. Okay? As soon as police officers arrive at a crime scene, they're going to make sure the threat is gone, make sure the scene is safe, and then put crime scene tape around the crime so that nobody else can get in or nobody that was there can leave. Okay? Police officers a lot of times are going to identify witnesses when they arrive. They're also going to separate those witnesses. They're going to make sure that they potentially look around initially to make sure that they've secured enough of the crime scene, make sure they've secured all of the contents of the crime scene, like the pieces of evidence within the crime scene. All of that is done right at the beginning by the police officers. The crime scene investigators are going to come in right after the police officers, and their job is to document the crime scene. Their job is to collect evidence. Okay, these are the crime scene investigators. These are the people that look for and identify and document and collect evidence. Medical examiners are going to come in, and if there is a death, like if there's a homicide, they will determine the cause of death. Okay, that would be your coroners, that would be your medical pathologist, right? That is a medical examiner. Their job is to look at the body in order to determine cause of death. Detectives will come in. They are in charge of basically running the case, running the crime scene, running the evidence in order to solve the crime, right? So they're going to interview witnesses. They're going to discuss evidence with the investigators. They are basically the ones that are trying to solve the crime. And then you have any specialists that may be needed. An example of a specialist would be a forensic entomologist, which is an insect biologist. And obviously, forensic entomologist might be called in if the body has been on scene a while, right? And you have some fly activity, maggot activity. The entomologist can actually, based on their understanding of insect development, can give you a pretty accurate cause of death, or not cause of death, but time of death, based on what stage the larvae are in. And so that would obviously be or need the training of a specialist. But there are a lot of specific specialists that we can call upon in any particular case as needed. Okay, so police officers, crime scene investigators, medical examiners, detectives, and any specialists that would be needed. There are 7 S's associated with crime scene investigation. They can be a little confusing, especially when you're trying to order them. They do go in order and they lead into each other. It is really important for you to be able to differentiate. And again, I know that there are 7 of them and they all start with S, but we're going to work through each of these in detail. Okay, so the first S is securing the scene. Like I said before, the first responders are going to obviously report first. Those would be your police officers, and their job is to make sure the area is safe. Their job is to rope off the scene. You can see this police tape, the standard do not cross crime scene tape, right? And their job is to protect or preserve the evidence within the crime scene. Not only are they going to report first, they're going to dispatch a threat, they're going to ensure the scene is safe, they're also going to mark or rope off the scene, and then they're going to protect that boundary so that no one gets in and potentially tampers with any evidence, right? And so one of the things that they should do when they get on scene is that they should keep a security log of everyone that comes in and out of the crime scene, so that there is kind of a log or document that is created to identify people coming and going, so that there's no questions or concerns later in terms of who has and hasn't potentially impacted the scene and who has or hasn't impacted any evidence contained within. All right, so that is securing the scene. Next, like I said before, separating the witnesses. That is key. We've gone through a couple activities in class, and you've been through all of the Chapter 1 content, and so you know that witnesses are making observations or potentially made observations of the crime in progress. And so based on what we know happens within the brain, and based on what we know happens while making observations in times of stress or in times of anxiety, we know that often our brain tries to fill in gaps of things that maybe aren't 100% understood. And so it is crucial for those police officers to separate witnesses, even if they're in the same group and even if they saw the same thing, because you do not want them talking to each other. You want each individual witness to tell the investigators exactly what they saw, how they saw it, how they perceived it. You don't want any of the witnesses to be influenced by anyone else, because one of the things that happens is that investigators can actually compare different versions of the events, and it likely will paint a more clear picture than if the group of witnesses talked and collaborated their story, even if they were not intentionally trying to sabotage a crime scene. They likely will kind of fill in gaps. They'll perceive and they'll make assumptions that may be inaccurate, and we don't want those witnesses to influence each other because it happens. And so separating the witnesses is key. So secure the crime scene, separate the witnesses, and then you want to scan the scene. This happens at the very beginning. Investigators need to take a first look. Keyword, first look. This is scanning. Okay, we are just scanning. We are not searching. We're not collecting evidence. We just want to scan the scene. It's a first look to determine if there are primary and secondary crime scenes. We're going to talk later in the class about primary and secondary crime scenes, but for now, we know that crimes can happen over the course of several locations. Bodies can be moved. Evidence can be moved. Evidence could be scattered to make it harder for investigators to put the pieces together, right? So there are oftentimes primary and secondary crime scenes. The primary scene is always where the crime occurred, and the secondary scene is always, if there is one, is if anything is moved to new locations. Okay? If the scene is secured at the beginning but only includes the primary scene, it is likely that any potential secondary scenes wouldn't be included within that initial perimeter, and we would want to expand the crime scene perimeter in order to ensure we have all of the evidence for any secondary scenes. Okay, and that is only determined if we scan the scene initially. Next is seeing the scene, and this is usually done digitally. Okay, and so how do we see the scene? If we just scanned it with our eyes, we want to see the scene by taking photos of the whole scene, any close-up images of specific pieces of evidence. We want middle distance photos, and we want long range kind of holistic whole scene photos, and each of those photos kind of helps to capture what is in the crime scene, so that if anything degrades, if anything is initially missed, if anything isn't readily standing out to the crime scene investigators, they can look at these pictures later, and it might help jog their memory. It might help solve a crime later once they have more information to kind of fill in the gaps. Okay, and so seeing the scene digitally, taking photos to capture all of the scene, both close up and long distance, is crucial in order to preserve the crime scene digitally for as long as the crime scene needs to be analyzed, right, in order for the crime to eventually be solved. Sketching the scene. Next would be sketching the scene. We need to sketch the scene in order to make an accurate model, okay, a scaled model, so that all of the individual pieces of evidence are identified, all of the locations are identified, all of the measurements are identified. We want all objects and distances to be proportional to each other, and we want it to be proportional to real life. Okay, as accurate as you can, sketch the scene. And one of the ways that these potentially will look is that you have a potential sketch in this little diagram, right? You have a room, you obviously have a body, you have all of these pieces of evidence, you have a key, you have directions, everything is drawn to scale, you know exactly how far objects are from other objects. That is critical when you're trying to put the scene together later on in the investigation. When you have all the pieces of evidence, we want to preserve the crime scene in both picture form and in sketch form, so that nothing is lost, and therefore nothing gets overlooked in the long run. Okay, sketching the scene can also look like this if we're talking more outdoor photo or a more outdoor sketch. We want to label any evidence that is available within our crime scene. We want to mark which way is north so that nobody perceives the location incorrectly. We want the case number, we want the date, we want the location, and we want all distances to be measured accurately to all objects and to 2 immovable landmarks. And the reason we want to do that is because the landmarks that are immovable provide us a reference point, so that if we wanted to go back, we could triangulate from those 2 immovable parts, okay, in order to find exactly where that piece of evidence was in real life, so that if we needed to recreate the scene or go back and look again for any additional information that we would have missed, we can do that really easily. Okay, searching for evidence. So we are finally now at the point where we need to search for evidence that may readily be hard to find, right? Might not readily be visible up front. And the way that we search for evidence is never randomly. We never want to just randomly meander through a crime scene. We always want to search the crime scene methodically and systematically. And 4 ways in which crime scenes are often searched based on the layout of the crime scene, based on the size of the crime scene, is in grid form, linear form, quadrant or zone form, and spiral form. Okay, grid, we search the crime scene just like a grid. We're going to start here, and we're going to go up and back and work through the crime scene much like you would mow a lawn, right? Where you would just go stripe by stripe by stripe by stripe by stripe, and then you would turn around and you would search it this way. And the key with this particular search pattern is that if you search it methodically in 2 directions, basically north-south and east-west, and you overlap each other it is likely that you're not going to miss many things, which is obviously a better search pattern than if you just kind of meandered through randomly, because you likely won't search every quadrant equally if you're doing it randomly, like you would if you were doing it in a grid pattern. Linear is just like grid, although you do it slightly different. Linear would be you move up, over, farther, down, over, and you continue to search in the exact same way until you are confident you have searched the entire area. Okay? Quadrant or zone would be when you kind of divide up the crime scene, or you look at the crime scene holistically, but then you break it up into quadrants or zones, and you say, this is quadrant 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to search 1 first, I'm going to search 2 second, I'm going to search 3 fourth, or third, and then fourth, quadrant 4 fourth. And within quadrant 1, or within each of these quadrants, just like it shows you in this one, you're going to divide the quadrants up, and you're going to search this one within this quadrant first, this quadrant second, this quadrant third, and this quadrant fourth. And so you would essentially, over the course of all of these zones, you would have searched methodically every single part, or subzone, if you will, of this entire crime scene. And then last is the spiral, and this can be used if you're in a bigger area, right, when you have to just kind of work through the crime scene in a spiral from either the very inside out or outside in. All of these are employed, all of them have their pros, all of them have their cons, but they are all beneficial and produce more quality results than just searching a crime scene randomly. Searching for evidence, again, can be like you can utilize things that aid your ability to search for evidence that help the naked eye, right? When you're looking for evidence with the naked eye, you are just looking and making observations based on what your eyes actually can see. But a lot of times, evidence may be buried. Sometimes evidence may be hidden. Sometimes evidence may be under things, right? And so it's hard to find evidence with the naked eye. And so we have employed modern technologies to assist the investigators in searching for evidence or suspects. And so this is actually a thermal image camera. And so I don't know if you remember this, but the Boston Marathon bomber, I remember when that happened live. He actually went into a neighborhood and he hid in somebody's boat in their backyard. And so they employed a thermal imaging camera from a helicopter to search the scene, and they actually saw the heat signature of a person sitting in basically a boat that is stored, and they sent police officers to that particular boat and they caught him. And so that is a modern technology that aids in recovering evidence or recovering people. This would be a picture of like a scanned ground penetrating radar. And so if things or ground has been disturbed, it's going to provide these big signatures. And so it's basically like taking an X-ray kind of the ground, and you're looking for these signatures, and the signatures basically represent disruptions in the ground density. And so you would expect that if somebody buried something, there would be disruptions in the ground where the things were buried. Okay, I think that's where we're going to end this video. I will see ya later.